Okay, so the White House just quietly gutted 50 years of civil rights protections for disabled Americans, got a federal judge to torch their election power grab, and watch their own boss incriminate himself on camera. Same week. Let's count the receipts. We're covering a DOJ memo Stephen Miller reportedly drove through, an executive order on voting a federal judge just killed, and Trump's most reliable habit, incriminating himself on camera. New here? Hit subscribe. Let's go.
Enforcement work at the Department of Justice. She is currently the director of the Hirsch Health Law and Policy Program at George Washington University, and she joins me now. Allison, walk us through what this memo would mean in practice.
So this memo is shocking in its reversal of 50 years of policy by the United States government that states should provide services to people with disabilities in their own homes and in their own communities instead of locking them away in institutions, hiding them away from society. And what this means in this reversal is that the main enforcer of disability rights laws has now said, we are not going to continue with that work. That's going to mean settlement agreements being undone, new positions in court, and the memo talks about undoing decades-long regulations that have been in place.
All right, so let's actually unpack what just happened. That was Allison Barkoff, professor at George Washington University and former DOJ disability enforcement official. Not a partisan critic, someone who was inside the building enforcing these exact laws. And she just called this a shocking reversal of 5 decades of federal policy. 5 decades. The ADA was signed in 1990. The Rehabilitation Act goes back to 1973. What this DOJ memo does, per Bloomberg Law reporting, is hand states a legal off-ramp to redirect federal funding away from community-based independent living programs and back into institutions. Nursing homes, psychiatric wards, segregated schools, the very institutions that 50 years of federal law was specifically designed to move people out of. And none of this went through Congress. No vote, no debate, a memo. Here's where it gets specific. Bloomberg Law reporting identified White House Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller as the primary driver behind this policy shift. Not a healthcare expert, not a disability rights attorney, Stephen Miller. The memo rewrites how both the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act are applied, effectively making institutionalization a federally acceptable alternative to community integration. The Supreme Court already ruled on this. In 1999, Olmstead v. LC, the court held that unjustified segregation of people with disabilities violates the ADA. That's been binding federal law for over 25 years. You cannot reverse a Supreme Court ruling with a DOJ memo. What you can do is signal to states that enforcement is off. No inspectors, no consequences, no follow-through. It's like a fire marshal announcing he won't be doing building inspections anymore. The buildings are still supposed to be up to code. He's just telling you nobody's coming to check.
Off top tonight, this loss is rooted in the Constitution. The president has no power to change this. Not the current president, not future presidents. This happens to be a Republican president who wants to do it, but if a Democrat tried the same gambit in the future, our system says no. Now, like many of Trump's fanciful executive orders, just trying to write down that he wished he had more power than he gets under the Constitution does not create that power. It actually doesn't do anything for him. And the judge is reiterating that, which is something everyone learns in law school. The president does not control elections or rewrite their local rules because the states alone determine voter eligibility requirements. The judge writing the Constitution doesn't grant the president any powers over the elections. And the states know that, and the judges know that. Obviously, their job is to interpret the law. Trump's lawyers know that. We'll take this back to me, yeah. I'm going to explain this in a second, but Trump's lawyers know that. Trump's lawyers basically let him barrel towards this loss rather than saving him the embarrassment, because as I'm telling you tonight, this was going to happen. You weren't going to just suddenly rewrite the Constitution to get control of elections. And now I'm going to explain.
So let me make sure the math is clear here. The President of the United States issued an executive order trying to restrict mail-in voting and tell states how to run their elections. A federal judge looked at that order and said no, because the Constitution is explicit. Article 1, Section 4. The time, place, and manner of federal elections are regulated by state legislatures, not the White House, not by executive order, not by presidential preference. And the judge didn't agonize over it. The ruling was that the executive mandate is legally powerless. Federal court language, not my commentary. What Melber nailed with the wire reference is the core problem here. You want it to be one way, but it's the other way. The way it works under the Constitution, the way it has always worked, is that your state decides how you vote. The president was never supposed to have that authority. A federal judge just said so in writing. Again,
Jay had insisted and put in writing that Comey was fired for mistakes that didn't have to do with the Russia probe of Trump's campaign. And then Trump admitted it was Russia, admitting a lie or making liars out of his DOJ leadership, a confession that haunted him as many of his aides were later indicted in the Mueller probe.
I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
Confession. They had already said it wasn't about that. They had a different cover story in writing. And then he admits it's about Russia and the Democrats and his anger and his political goals. That was a journalistic interview that mattered. It yielded damning information. It led to the convictions, accountability, deterrence, because the DOJ system was working then. People like Paul Manafort went from being the #1 official in the 2016 Trump campaign to going on trial, getting convicted, being incarcerated.
okay, so here's what you just watched. Trump at a political rally publicly bragging about calling a U.S. attorney in California to interfere in a local election probe, and taking personal credit for a Republican victory that followed. That is, the president claiming on stage that he used the Justice Department as a personal political weapon for applause. And what Melber connects here is the documented pattern. May 2017, Trump sat down with NBC News anchor Lester Holt and stated on tape that he fired FBI Director James Comey because of the Russia investigation. His own DOJ had released a cover story days earlier blaming the firing on Comey's handling of the Clinton email case. Trump personally destroyed that cover story on national television. The official DOJ position lasted less than a week before the principal contradicted it on NBC News. So the rally clip is not a gaffe. It is the same pattern, documented, repeatable, and now on its second administration. He just keeps telling on himself. So here's the pattern, because these three stories are not random. They are one administration operating in three lanes at once, quietly rewriting civil rights enforcement through a DOJ memo, no vote, no debate, no public process, and no enforcement mechanism for courts to immediately grab onto, loudly overreaching on elections, knowing the courts would push back, but doing it anyway to test exactly where the constitutional ceiling actually sits. And all of it constantly narrated, voluntarily, by a president who cannot stop telling on himself. And even within his own party, the math doesn't add up. Senate Majority Leader John Thune went on record and said it plainly. The votes for the Save America Act do not exist. His own caucus won't deliver it. So here's the line if someone brings any of this up. Stephen Miller quietly rewrote disability rights enforcement through a DOJ memo. No Congress required. A federal judge confirmed the president has zero constitutional authority over how your state runs its elections. Zero. And Trump went on stage at a rally and confessed to using the Justice Department as a political weapon for applause. Full stop. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see it. I'll catch you in the next one.